Pam Bondi, Donald Trump's attorney general, is building something that looks an awful lot like a national gun registry. The Justice Department doesn't call it that, of course. They call it the Firearms Rights Restoration Program, an online system meant to help people with old convictions apply to get their gun rights back under Section 925C of federal law. On paper, it sounds like a gesture of mercy, restoring rights, second chances. But in practice, applicants have to upload their full legal name, home address, social security number, criminal record, mental health history, and documentation of firearm ownership. All of that goes into a centralized Department of Justice database managed under Bondi supervision. That's the story here. Under Donald Trump's second term, the federal government is compiling verifiable data on who owns guns, where they live, and what they own. The very infrastructure MAGA swore Democrats were plotting to build is being built by them. For years, Republican politicians and right-wing media screamed that Democrats wanted to create a gun registry, that liberals wanted to take your guns. They built an entire culture around that paranoia. And now, the Trump administration has done exactly what they warned about. The irony is killing me. Let me say this up front. I am completely in favor of gun control. America's obsession with guns is a sickness. We are the only country in the world where mass shootings have become so routine that people just scroll past them in their news feeds. No civilian needs an AR-15. No society that values life needs military-grade weapons in the hands of ordinary citizens. So when I call out the hypocrisy of this administration building a database that functions as a registry, it's not because I oppose gun control. I support it. Bans, buybacks, background checks, all of it. What I oppose is the lie that the people screaming about tyranny ever cared about freedom in the first place. Because when tyranny actually arrived, and it has, it's here, the question isn't whether they'll fight for Trump, it's whether they'll recognize that the government they swore to resist is now their own. They voted for it. They've stockpiled weapons for decades, waiting for some imagined government takeover. And now that an authoritarian government is here, led by their chosen strongman, will they finally see it for what it is? Or will they convince themselves that this is the kind of tyranny they can live with? To understand how we got here, you have to go back to where it began. The National Rifle Association wasn't always what it is today. It was founded in 1871 by Union Army officers who wanted better trained marksmen after the Civil War. For over a century, the NRA promoted gun safety, hunting, and sport shooting. It supported reasonable regulation. It backed the 1934 National Firearms Act, which restricted machine guns, and the 1968 Gun Control Act, passed after a wave of political assassinations. Then came 1977, the so-called Revolt at Cincinnati. That's where hardliners seized control of the NRA, purged the moderates, and transformed it into a political machine. The message shifted from responsibility to resistance, from sportsmanship to paranoia. Gun ownership became not just a right, but an identity. The NRA and the conservative movement turned fear into a business model. They convinced millions that their guns were the only thing protecting them from a tyrannical government, never noticing that the tyranny they should have feared was growing inside their own movement. For most of American history, the Second Amendment was understood as a collective right tied to state militias, as is stated in the Second Amendment. It wasn't until 2008 in the Supreme Court case D.C. versus Heller that Justice Antonin Scalia redefined it as an individual's right to own firearms for self-defense. That decision didn't fall from the sky. It was the product of decades of conservative legal activism and gun lobby funding designed to fuse violence with patriotism and make fear feel like freedom. Now in 2025, that ideology has delivered us here. Pam Bondi's so-called rights restoration database gives Trump's Justice Department a complete map of gun owners across the country. And if the government ever decides that some of those gun owners are enemies of the state, they'll know exactly where to find them. Every dictatorship in history has used that kind of list. In Weimar Germany, gun registration began as a measure to reduce political violence. So when the Nazis came to power, they used those same records to disarm Jews and political opponents. Go back a little further in the post-Civil War South. The Black Codes stripped freedmen, the newly freed slaves, of the right to bear arms, leaving them defenseless against white terror. Go back a little further, 1775, when British troops tried to seize colonial gunpowder stores. That's what sparked the first shots of the American Revolution at Lexington and Concord. The pattern is always the same. You build a system in the name of safety or freedom, and sooner or later, somebody uses it for control. And that's where we are right now. Pam Bondi's Justice Department is building the very database MAGA once called the mark of tyranny. The question is, when will they recognize it as such? When will the people who spent decades stockpiling weapons just in case finally see that the government they feared is here, and it's wearing their colors, flying their flag, and speaking their language? Will they rise up against it? Or will they stay silent because it feels familiar, because it feels like them? That's the real test of conviction. Not whether you own a gun, but whether you can recognize when your freedom has already been taken. Trump doesn't need to confiscate weapons tomorrow. He just needs the list today. And Pam Bondi, she's given it to him. When a nation confuses obedience with patriotism, it doesn't need to be conquered. It just stops noticing that it's no longer free.